Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Nazir Daf Chaf Beis, and we're in the middle of a sugya as to whether or not the following is true. We know, of course, Psukim and Chumash, that a husband has the ability to be mefer his wife's neder. If a wife were to make a neder and a husband were to be mefer that neder many hours later, do we look at that hafaras nedarim as retroactive? Let's say she made her neder at 12 and he did hafara at 2. Do we say that the neder, it's as if it was a zero, poof, it never existed, magic, and therefore any implications that would have been true between 12 and 2 are not true? Or do we say, no, it's just in the moment, it's only taking effect at 2 p.m.? We had a number of answers, 3 supplied yesterday that did not yet work. And on the top of Chaf Beis Amud Aleph, excuse me, on the top line, we'll see our fourth approach to this. Oh, it is too hot. Tashma, top line. Ha'isha shenadra ben Nazir, a woman who made a commitment that she wanted to be a Nazira, ben nitmes, and she became Tmeya. And then, ve'achar kach, so she became a Nazira at 12 o'clock. She became Tmeya as a Nazira at 1 o'clock. Ve'achar kach hefer labayla, and at 2 o'clock, her husband was mefer her neder. What's the din? The din is that mevia chata sa'of ve'ena mevia ola sa'of. She brings only one of the 2 korbanos. Now, of course, that's a little bit of an odd presentation because you either are or aren't. So the Gemara says, 3 lines down on Chaf Beis Amud Aleph, V'isal kadaitach bal megas gayes, if what you want to say that when a husband does hafara, that it only applies mikanu lahaba from this moment and forward. She became a Nazira at 12. She became Tmeya at 1, and the husband was mefer the Nadarim at 2. So if that's true and it's megas gayes, and really only from here on out, 2 p.m. and on, that's when the hafara takes effect, then teisinami ola sa'o. Then she should be bringing both korbanos, because when she became Tmeya, that was 1 o'clock. But if we say Megas Gayes, he's only interrupting her Nazirus at 2, but anything that happened before that, she's halachically on the hook. So if we say that Baal Megas Gayes, and she should have to bring both korbanos. So it says the Gemara, that's a terrible suggestion. And we already could probably see this coming, because Elamai, what you're going to say, Me'akir Akar, you're going to say it's retroactive back to 12 o'clock and she never was a Nazir, pixie dust. That can't be. If that's true, then Chata Sa'of Nami Lotesi, she shouldn't even have to bring any animals. Manavshach. And the Gemara provides the following response. Hachanami, you're correct. As it relates to her becoming Tmeya, becoming Tmeya as a Nazira, she doesn't have to bring any korbanos. Why in this case do we require her to bring the Chata Sa'of? Says the Gemara, V'hamani, who is the author of this brisa, who indicates that she would have to bring a Chata Sa'of? It's Rabbi Eliezer HaKafarhi. We've seen this already 3 times. This is for sure the 3rd, maybe even more. What does it say on the side here? 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the 4th. This is the 5th time so far in Shas. And what does he hold? We've seen this already. The Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer HaKafar bar Rebbe Omer. What sin did this person do? They just became a Nazir. We see that a person who accepts upon themselves Nazirus, they restrict themselves from wine. That's very problematic. And we're continuing with this line of reasoning that we've already proven our point. A person who restricts themselves from the physical benefits of this world, even if it's only yain, they're called a chote. All the more so, if a person were to restrict themselves from more, they would be considered a chote. So we tried to give our answer. We tried to show that really it's megas guys. It says Gemara can't be megas guys. Also can't be me'akar akar in this brisa, because why would you only bring one of the 2 korbanos? It says really it's me'akar akar. Really, we would assume that it's me'akar akar, but why do you have to bring a korban? Because Rabbi Eliezer HaKafar, because we hold that she did an avera for becoming a Nazira, and this is already, we've seen this throughout Shas a number of times. So we have yet to have a good answer, and then now we have our Makeh B'Patish answer, a strong and clear response from a brisa. Tashma, 4 lines from the bottom, the first long line, Chaf Beis Amud Aleph. Tanya Behedya, we have an explicit brisa. Ha'isha shenadra bin Nazir, a woman accepts Nazirus upon herself. V'shama chaversa, her best friend, hears about it. Chana accepts Nazirus upon herself, and Penina hears about it. V'amra v'ani, and then Penina says v'ani, me too. Uba baila shel rishona v'heferla, and then the husband shows up and undoes the hafara of Chana. So let's talk about flow of events. At 12 o'clock, Chana says Hareini Nazira. At 12 o'clock and 1 second, Penina says, Va'ani. And at 1 p.m., the husband walks in. Oh, what did you guys do today? Oh, we just started in a Nazirus. We're drinking seltzer, no wine. The husband says, I'm made for your Nadarim. Well, he can't be made for the second woman because that's not his wife.
Yeah, because it goes in the flow of events from 1 to 2. Right.
So we'll see. We have to see what happens with woman number 2. But certainly he's allowed to be made for his wife's neder because that's the din in Chumash. So says the Gemara, what's the din? Himu teres. The wife, Chana, in this case, is no longer a Nazira. She can drink wine. V'chaverta asura. However, the friend is still asura. What does that show you about the husband's capacity to be mefer a neder? Shma mina baal megas gayis. It has to be that we don't retroactively go back in time and undo everything. How do we know that that's true? Because Penina's nazirus is still chal. Why is Penina's nazirus still chal? Because when she took nazirus on herself at 12 o'clock in 1 second, it was a perfect storm. It was a perfect scenario for her. Why should it be undone? And the Gemara therefore assumes that baal is megas gayis. Good. That's the conclusion of the Gemara. We hold, at least again, according to this sugya, that hafaras nadarim of a husband is megas gayis. And just to be explicit as to what that means, when a husband is made for a neder, it only applies from this moment and onwards mikanu lehaba. It does not go back in time retroactively to undo the neder from its beginning.
Which means had she in some way broken it, she'd be back in
100%. Correct. That would be a very practical nafkamina, and the brisa at the top would not be ladina, because the brisa at the top we wriggled out of that brisa. And by the way, I wasn't going to say this until you raised your question. All 4 of these previous brisas that were not the right answer didn't need to be brought. We had the explicit one. And the reason why they're brought is so that the Rishonim can say, wait, they have to split every hair and make sure we have every din clear. And that's exactly right. You have to go through all the cases. Now that we know that the din is megas gayis, what about all the times you skirted out of the case by saying, no, it's me'akar akar. So we have to go back and with the Rishonim and spend a week figuring out exactly how every case would work. Now, this line that we just learned, this brisa, is actually a tosefta, and that tosefta continues with the following line: Reb Shimon Omer im amra la hareni k'moseich. If instead of saying va'ani, when Chana says hareni Nazir, Penina said va'ani. But now, if she doesn't say va'ani and she says rather k'moseich, and then the husband is mefer, shtein mutaros. What does that mean? It's a different word. So that means we have to analyze the different word that Penina chose to use. In scenario number 1, Chana said Hareni Nazira, Penina said Va'ani, and we said that even if the husband is made for the neder, that Penina's Nazira is still Chal. However, if Chana says Hareni Nazira and Penina doesn't say Va'ani, and she says Hareni Kimoseich, I'm just like you, more specific language, more matchy language, I'm just not Va'ani, I'll also be a Nazira, but rather I'm going to be just like your Nazirus. Then, when the husband is made for the wife's neder, then Nazirus dissolves from both women. That's pretty mechudash, because what that means is that the form of agreement, the phraseology of how Penina agrees to Chana's Nazirus is very, very particular. Like again, in our language, we have books of synonyms, and we have, a thesaurus, and we have all these words that are very similar. In halacha, each one needs its own determination. The word va'ani, me too, as we would loosely translate here, is not the same as I'd like to be just like you. They're not the same. Va'ani is distinct. It's separate. I want to be like you, but I'm not you. And hareni kamosech is you and I are 2 peas in a pod, and whatever happens to the wife would happen to the friend. Chudash, no? Ask your question. I think I know.
It's a special din that a husband could be made for his wife's neder. Somebody else makes it. She can't say, I'm going to be a Nazira for
Yeah,
based on.
but let's just put it in like the terms and conditions language that we have in our culture. When I click on this website, I hereby take on the responsibility as though I'm the owner of the website. Whatever the owner says can happen, can happen. Whatever the owner says can't happen, can't happen. If you dissolve some of the burdens on the president, then I can do the same thing that he can. We're exactly the same. I'm not agreeing to your terms and conditions. I am your terms and conditions. So here we're saying something kind of similar. She's saying, I'm not saying I'm conceptually like you, that I also want Naziris for myself. Va'ani, according to the Gemara, is you took on Naziris for yourself. I also want to take on Naziris for myself. Now the Gemara is saying, Harini Kimosech, you took on Nazirus. I want to take on Nazirus with the same parameters that you took on Nazirus. That's what we're saying. So therefore, her Nazirus is dependent on Chana's. The rules are the same. And therefore, she's in effect absorbing this possibility of hafaras nadarim, even though she's not married to the man. But it's two steps. The husband's made for the wife's neder, and therefore, by default, the next woman falls, and she's no longer in a zero. We'll see some language of this in the Gemara in a minute. But that's what the Gemara says, the Tosefta says, and that brings us to the top of Chav Beis Amud Beis. We'll be going, Mir Hashem, to the Mishnah on the top of Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, and then it looks like we have a bit of a meaty Gemara for tomorrow. Meaty. Okay. Mar Zutra Berei Rav Mari Omar. Hi. Hi Nudra. What? Oh. Hi. This that we just learned about the possibility of distinguishing between Chana and Penina just with the simplicity of different words. Hi, this that we just learned, Hainu de Rami Bar Chama. This actually can be utilized in regards to something that Rami Bar Chama had asked. The boy Rami Bar Chama. If a person says, Hare alai, I'm restricting a loaf of bread on me, let's say, kibasar zevach shlamim, like the meat of a zevach shlamim of a korban shlamim. Mahu, what is the din? Do we say ki matfis inish bi'ikara matfis, that when a person says this piece of bread is going to be like the korban shlamim, that it means like in the isser state of before it's shechted? O Dilma, or perhaps fourth line down on Chav Beis Amud Beis, or perhaps would we say bitzinina matfis? Bitzinina, we know the word sonein, it means cold, and it's a little bit of a play on words. It's when the blood has drained from the animal, that's right? Bitzinina, after the blood has left the animal, when the animal's cold, matfis, there it's mutter to eat now, because what happens when the blood has been drained after Kabbalah Sadam and Zrika? What's the din? Now the meat's mutter to eat. A shlamim is for consumption. So when a person says that I want this piece of bread to be like a zevach shlamim, do we say it's like moment number one of the zevach where the animal is restricted because shechita hasn't taken place yet? Or do we say it's like moment number end of the road, Kabbalah Sadam and Zrika has been done, and therefore the shlamim is edible? So hare alai kezevach shlamim, are we like the usher status of the shlamim or the mutter status of the shlamim? And that the Gemara wants to say is very similar to our conversation about Chana and Penina, because after all, we are trying to figure out when you say kizevach shlamim, it's like the zevach shlamim. That's like her saying that I want to be kamosech. I want to be just like you. What does it mean to be just like you? Does it mean same exact rules, or does it mean just conceptually the same rules? And the Gemara does not like this comparison. Says the Gemara, midami, the case of the korban shlamim is not the same as our case of Chana and Penina. After all, hasam kevan da'amar hare alai kebasar zevach shlamim. Once a person accepts upon themselves that this piece of bread, this loaf of bread, would be usher just like a korban zevach, afal gav, that you're right, dila achar shenizrak damo matzi achile b'chutz, even though you're right that after shechita takes place, I can eat that korban shlamim outside of the azara. I agree with you, but still mikdash kaddish, it's still sanctified. That animal is a shlamim, and if you take it out of the Beis HaMikdash and it's mutter, that's great. But we still have rules of nosar. We still have rules. There's an expiration date on when you can eat it. It's still kadosh. There's different halachos, but it's still kadosh. Mashe'ein Kain, says the Gemara 8 lines down. Aval hacha, in the case of Chana and Penina, when she says Hareni Kemosech, is that the right language? Yeah, Hareni Kemosech. In that case, over here says the Gemara, Aval hacha isal kadaitach betzinina. No, yeah. Aval hacha over here isal kadaitach betzinina kamatvis. If you want to say that the comparison is bitzinina kamatvis, that we look at the zevach shlamim like the blood has been drained and it's mutter to eat, well, what would be the equal to that in regards to hafara? That would be ha-hefer la baila. That would be the same as a husband having done the hafara. You want to say you're just like her in that her husband was made for the neder? Then there's no nazirus at all. So the comparison is completely off. And then the Gemara, this is an odd line. I'm saying this is an odd line because it's Omer Dorsheni. We just said why the comparison between the case of the Zevach is not good to the case of Chana and Penina. What does the next line of the Gemara say? This is a perfect answer to Rami Bar Chama. So that requires research. We just rejected that, and the Gemara doesn't bother dialoguing about it. Now, we've discussed what happens if Penina says Va'ani. We've discussed what happens if Penina says Hareni Kimosech. Let's discuss yet a third language. Amra la, if she says in response to Chana, one says Hareni Nazira, and then she says Bi'ikvech, just like in your footsteps, I guess would be the equivalent translation. Mahu. Do we say Hareini beikvech bekula milsa v'sharia, that she's just like Chana, and therefore, if there's hafara, she too would have hafara on her nazirus? O dilma, or perhaps a third of the way down, kimekame delefer la baila ve'asira. Or do we look comparatively, saying that Chana and Penina are similar to the pre-hafara state only, and that hafara would not work? And the Gemara tries to offer a response to this. Tashma, ha'isha shenadra ben Nazir. A woman accepts nazirus upon herself. V'shama baila, her husband hears about this, v'amar va'ani. And he says, me too. The husband wants to join. Eino yochel lahafer. We discussed this in the Mishnah. This is the Mishnah that we started with on Shabbos, I think, or a couple of days ago, maybe Sunday night. What does the Mishnah say over there? That if the woman says, Hareini Nazira, and the husband says, Va'ani, he can't be made for her neder. V'isal kadaitach, ki amar la Hareini be'ikveich, be'ikara kamatvis. If you want to say that when she says Hareini beikveich, that I'm just going in your footsteps and it only applies to the status of Isser, if that's true, then Leifer laladida, the lokim didei. Then he should be able to be made for her neder in our Mishnah, and he would still remain to be Asar in his own right, even though he said Va'ani. We bifurcate, we separate the two people. But because we don't say that in our Mishnah, Elalav, it must therefore be Shma Mina, Bekula de Milsa Matvis, that when a person says Beikveich, when Penina responds to Chana, Chana says Hareini Nazira, and she responds that she says Hareini Beikveich, that really is Tekula Milsa Matvis. Obviously, she's saying she's just like that. Penina is just like Chana, because otherwise the husband should have been able to separate himself from his wife. The Hilkach hu delo matzi mefer ha'isha da'amri Hareini Beikveich hinami muteres. Therefore, the halacha should be exactly the same between Chana and Penina. And that would be the din, and therefore we have our answer that it's bekula milsa matvis. Says the Gemara, lo, that's not correct. Lo olam beikara matvis. Really, when a woman says hareini beikveich in response to her friend's hareini nazira, we're only talking about the pre-hafara status. V'hacha kevan da amarla va'ani. Here we have a different problem, which is that when the husband said va'ani, he can't go back later and do hafara. Why not? Because when he says va'ani, ke'omer kayim lichi dami. That's as if he already validated her nazirus, her neder, and he can't go back from that. So if he can undo the hakama in Bezdin, fine, motzi mefer, lo, and therefore we don't really have a clear answer in regards to hareini beikveich. So let's summarize what we've learned so far in the last amud. We've spoken about the following case where Chana says hareini nazira, and Penina in response says one of three options: va'ani, hareini kimosech, and hareini beikveich. Those are the three different iterations. I've said this a dozen times, and we'll say it more times. We have no idea how sensitive we need to be in halacha in order to follow halacha in regards to our speech. It is exceedingly difficult. Our language has way too many words. Halacha is very, very terse, and this is one of the reasons that I find nazirus to be a little difficult, because it's hard to, we're just not sensitive with our words. Next sugya. We're at the 2 dots, 7 lines from the bottom of the page on Chav Beis and Mud Beis, heading to the Mishnah at the top of the page. We had said, Hareini Nazir, ve'at. A husband says, I am a Nazir, and you, referring to his wife. Ve'amra amen, and she says, I'm in. Therefore, mefer es shelo v'shelo kayim. There, he is allowed to separate and say that he can be mefer his wife, and he would still be on the hook because she was after the fact. Says the Gemara, that's not simple. Uriminhu, we have a stira. We have a stira from a Tosefta. What does the Tosefta say? Hareini Nazir ve'at. If a man says that he wants to be a Nazir and then refers to his wife ve'at and you too, ve'amra amen shnehem asurin ve'im lav shnehem mutarin mibnei shatala nidro b'nidro. So this brisa doesn't agree with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah seems to say that a husband can be mefer when he says Hareini Nazir and she says amen, that he can be made for her neder while he's still on the hook. This new Tosefta says not like that. This new Tosefta says it's both, either or. Either they're both Nazirim, or neither of them are Nazir. So how do we answer this question? A stira, direct stira between our Mishnah and a Tosefta. So answer number 1, the Gemara says 4 lines from the bottom of the page, Amar Rav Yehuda, Tini, mefer es shelo v'shelo kayim. The Tosefta has the wrong language, and really the din is just like our Mishnah, that he is allowed to be made for her neder, and he would still be on the hook for his Nazirus. Abaye Amar, no need to change the language. Afilu tema kidikatani. We can even keep the text of the Tosefta exactly like we have it. How so? Brisa, the case of the Tosefta which we're referring to here as a brisa, where we said that they're either both Nazirim or neither of them are Nazirim, that's Kegon de Ka'amar La, Hareini Nazir Ve'at. He's not asking her, would you like to be a Nazir? He's telling her, I am a Nazir, and so are you. And that she can't shake out of that. Dekatali nidra benidra. They're interdependent. And if she doesn't end up doing it, then he's not. That's how the brisa makes sense, where they're either both Nazirim or neither of them are Nazirim.
She doesn't have a freedom of choice.
It's a great question. It's not referred to here in the Gemara, but remember, the case was where she said Amen.
Oh, she said.
The Tosefta, he said Hareini Nazir Va'at. He didn't say it as a question. He said it as a statement. And in his head, it was talui nidra benidra. He basically said, I'm going to become a Nazir if you become a Nazir. And she said Amen. That's how we're understanding this brisa. But in our case, says the Gemara, on the top of Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, Umas Nisin, our Mishnah, where we see that the husband is allowed to be made for his wife's neder. That's Kegon to Amar La Hareini Nazir Ve'at Mai. I would like to become a Nazir. What about you, sweetheart? Would you like to join me in my Nazirus? There, she's not forced. There, we make a distinction. Mishum hachi mefer eshalah v'shelo kayim. There, we do have a distinction. We'll stop right here and pick up in Mirz Hashem tomorrow night. Huh?
It becomes the same distinction we learned between ba'ani and then kamoska. If they're literally intertwined, you can't have one without the other.
Correct.
Versus she accepts it's completely separate, and then he can go and do the regular hafara. You do it comes out of the exact thing.
Very similar. The one difference is that this brisa, no, they're very similar. I was going to say he spoke on her behalf, but she said Amen, so it's not that.
It comes out the same. Is it interconnected or they?
Yeah, that's right.
Other things come into play.
That's right.
The second way where he forced her, it doesn't say that she said Amen though.
Yeah, the brisa. In the brisa, she said Amen.
Yeah, you can't.
It says Amen. It says Amen in the Tosefta.
So he's not actually forced.
Wishing you all a beautiful night.